The U.S. military snatched a gigantic oil tanker belonging to the Venezuela guys off the coast of the Caribbean. Big Emperor Trump declared this was the biggest tanker ever to be snatched. Oh my God. But according to His Majesty, this wasn't an act of piracy. It was a seizure. Seizure. You catch my drift? Sounds like some high and mighty mission from the world's top cop. Basically, the Big Emperor Trump's logic is just next-level delusional. So whose oil is on that ship? Venezuela's. Right. Yet, His Majesty is acting like the Venezuela squad stole it from somewhere, and the U.S. is just collecting it back. Screaming. This whole farce is actually quality. It's only as good as, or better than, that European circus pulling shady low-key stunts to straight-up pocket Russia's cash. But why did the U.S. have to mobilize a massive force, including the FBI, Coast Guard, and the whole War Department with warships and massive scary aircraft, just to blatantly steal Venezuela's assets right now? This isn't just the same old tired story the world knows, like, if you have oil, Americans will have to fly and swim to your place for democracy. Nah, His Trumpness's power move in the Caribbean. See as a signal for huge changes impacting every corner of the globe, from the Western Hemisphere, through Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, all the way to Asia. A new era has officially dropped. Not. But whether humanity will see life flourishing or life hitting a wall needs a breakdown to figure out. The first thing everyone knows is that us fat cats are always drooling over the Veen guys' oil fields. Not only is their oil reserve top tier globally, but the key thing is their oil is cheap to extract, easy to pump up, and the profit margin is ridiculously high. The U.S. is watching, mouth-watering. Their own shale oil, just to squeeze it out, is insanely expensive. If the oil price hits $50 a barrel, the USS oil just breaks even. But Venezuela are totally fine at $20, maybe even making a profit. That's the tea on why the U.S. wants to overthrow old man Maduro and install a democratic, pro-U.S. president, who will then sign away all the sweet oil wells to the U.S. The U.S. has that high-level democracy move. If you follow, you're cool. But if you clap back at the U.S., every media outlet will call you a dictator who needs to be overthrown ASAP. And since the Venezuela guys are both rich in oil and clapping back right in the USS face, they're never going to let that slide. Back in his first term, His Majesty Trump tried to force a whack president on the Venezuela crew. That was back in 2019 when Venezuela held an election. This guy Juan Guaido, the head of the National Assembly controlled by the opposition, he pulled that basic democracy playbook stunt. Win, and you're the king. Lose, blame fraud. He accused old man Maduro of playing dirty, meaning, election fraud. After that, he self-proclaimed a solo provisional government and was immediately endorsed by the great President Trump as the puppet king of Venezuela. Almost worked. Whew. But old man Maduro was too solid, held down the fort. And the USS first inside job, outside attack scheme failed. His Majesty Trump has held a grudge against Venezuela ever since. Now he's back in the White House. An inside job, outside attack. 2.0 has been launched with a new puppet, carefully handed a Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado. This woman got the Nobel Peace Prize for leading the coup back in 2002. Luckily, she only managed to overthrow old man Hugo Chavez for 60 hours. But during that time, she still managed to sign a decree abolishing the Constitution and dissolving all governing bodies. She uses the name of a Venezuelan to beg the U.S. for military intervention to forcibly liberate Venezuela, and campaigns for U.S. sanctions to choke the economy. She knows perfectly well that the ones who pay the price are the poor, the sick, and the working class. She vows to reopen the Venezuelan embassy in Jerusalem, openly stands with Israel's side, and calls the act of dropping democracy on the Palestinian self-defense. Shocker. Right after winning the prize, she called Trump. Her voice was all whiny and sycophantic. This award belongs to you, sir. Venezuela only relies on you. You are the hope of our country. She doesn't even try to hide her hope that Trump will send troops into Venezuela to overthrow the legitimate government of old man Maduro and put her in charge. And when that happens, she's ready to hand over the country's oil, water, and infrastructure to U.S. private corporations. Mamma mia. A human with that kind of character gets a Nobel Peace Prize. Its prestige must be about as high as the Ig Nobel or a Golden Globe. So, as Puppet Woman has done the inside job part, what about the outside attack? His Majesty Trump declared war on the cartels to blow up boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, and recently authorized the CIA to operate inside Venezuela. Then he wrote to Congress saying the guys who got blown up were illegal combatants in an armed conflict, and the U.S. Navy was forced to defend itself. Or, put another way, His Majesty's take is that the U.S. crew has too much white powder. They're logging out a little too often, and that white powder is trafficked by cartels. So he wants to treat the cartels as combatants in a war and use military force against those goons. Oh, the lies. The truth is that most of the US guy's good stuff is cooked by chefs in Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico, and it's transported over land or through the Pacific. Yet, His Majesty Trump is deploying a zillion warships, fighter jets, drones, submarines, and the most amazing soldiers on Earth to the Caribbean just to boom boom a few rickety wooden boats off the coast of Venezuela. But then, the mess went one step further when he declared that President Nicolas Maduro is the godfather of the cartel. Once again, the US guys failed to provide any evidence. All you need to know is that if you link Old Man Maduro to the cartel, you automatically have the right to use military force in Venezuela. However, the situation doesn't seem to be what His Majesty hoped for, or at least not as fast as he hoped. The US squad has been swarming around Venezuela for months. Talk about being a big spender. They even brought the USS most massive aircraft carrier, the Ford, just to stock some crude wooden boats. Truly, balling out of control and tossing money into the ocean without blinking. Looking at this situation, we can guess that the inside job, outside attack campaign hasn't dropped the final blow yet. It seems the witches faction is being tightly marked by Old Man Maduro with help from Russian and Chinese intelligence. The inside job can't get started, so they can only ramp up the outside attack. And that's the action the guys are seeing right now. Whoa, shocking. We've got the FBI, Customs, Homeland Security investigations, and the US Coast Guard jumping out of the mega aircraft carrier mobilized by the War Department. All of this just to bust a crude oil tanker carrying sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran. Big Emperor Trump announced this was the biggest ship ever seized by the US, and the US is going to gobble up all the oil on board. The Venezuela guys are fuming, calling the US action blatant robbery and international piracy aimed at stripping their country of energy resources. The bilateral crisis is worsening as the US advises airlines to avoid flying over Venezuelan airspace, leading to mass flight cancellations and a sharp decline in international operations. It's clear that His Majesty Trump hopes these actions will make Old Man Maduro shook like the noose is tightening, and he'll have to surrender so the democracy clown can take over. It seems unlike 2019, this time Trump is determined to apply maximum pressure. Whether His Majesty dares to smash the Venezuela guys is still TBD, but this level of persistent, almost obsessive harassment is no longer just a simple resource grab scheme at a deeper level. It's a new US national security strategic action. Specifically, it's the revival of the so-called Monroe Doctrine. No need for a high-level explanation. This doctrine is simply Europe shouldn't interfere in the Americas, and vice versa. The US won't get involved in European affairs. Or put another way, the US must be the sole big boss protecting the Western Hemisphere, and no one else is allowed to interfere with the USS business. For example, during the Cold War, the Monroe Doctrine was dragged out as an excuse to justify protecting US national interests in its backyard. From the embargo on Cuba, masterminding regime changes in Latin America, to pumping hot stuff and training the scary thugs in the civil wars in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. So, what form does the Monroe Doctrine take in the new US national security strategy today? If the Western Hemisphere was previously always considered the US backyard, but rarely placed centrally in strategic security documents, now His Majesty Trump is focusing on it abnormally much. The Trump administration asserts that the US must maintain its dominant position in the Western Hemisphere as an essential condition for security and prosperity. This allows Washington to confidently act wherever necessary. The document emphasizes that the US must prevent hostile external influence in the region, including control over military bases, seaports, key infrastructure, and strategic assets. And who else is this hostile external influence other than the China and Russia crews who are increasingly taking over in Latin America? They are directly challenging the U.S. on its own turf. No wonder His Majesty Trump is restless. It's like he's sitting on a hot stove. He clearly sees this risk, and instead of spreading forces all over the place, he needs to build a security perimeter around U.S. territory. How? First, he needs to tighten up the Coast Guard and Navy to control maritime routes. And second is the classic move, bringing democracy to countries in the backyard region. That's why Trump is accusing old man Maduro of being the white powder godfather, offering a $50 million reward for his head, doing everything possible to pressure him to give up his spot to the Nobel. But here's the hilarious part. At the same time, His Majesty pardoned the former president of Honduras. This guy is serving a 45-year sentence for helping transport hundreds of tons of white powder into the U.S. Life is so messy. Just because the former Honduran president is still useful to the U.S. with his close ties to the Honduran elite and security forces. This guy is exactly the kind of far-right, loyal customer Trump needs in a country where U.S. troops are stationed and who can help control migration routes to the U.S. Trump's calculation becomes even clearer when the former president was released just days before the election in Honduras. Clearly, his mission is to return home, consolidate the conservative networks he once led to support Trump's preferred presidential candidate. In Trump's America First calculation, this pardon also sends a very clear signal. Those who are good will be rewarded. Meanwhile, Trump's strategy no longer calls Russia an enemy or a competitor of the U.S., and instead, it details very clearly how Europe has abandoned shared values with the USO. No, guys, you're not democratic anymore. His Majesty Trump is seriously rewriting U.S. security doctrine. The Western Hemisphere is designated as the front line for U.S. defense. At the same time, the U.S. is moving away from the global interventionist doctrine toward a more transactional policy, only engaging abroad when direct interests are threatened. But you see, the strategy is hailed as the roadmap to keep America great. However, 8 or 9 out of 10 parts of U.S. interest are built on instability in other nations. I'm afraid what awaits us will be an increasingly unpredictable global future. What's your take on this new era? Drop a comment and tell me what you think will happen next.